To order the May 1st meeting of the Verona Plan Commission, and we'll have the roll. Mr. Sayre, please.
Commissioner Manley,
Here.
Commissioner Turk,
Here.
Mayor Hokumer,
Here.
Commissioner Horsfall, Commissioner Heinzen is here, and I think he ran to his car, and Commissioner Lytle is currently not here, but he is on his way.
We do have a quorum, so we will proceed with the meeting. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes from the April 3rd meeting of the Plan Commission. Those minutes were included with your packet. What's your pleasure?
Move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Manley. Were there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Any additions or corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Next, we have discussion and possible action regarding site plan review for a proposed 20-stall bicycle shelter to be located at 200 Keenan Court. If we were to take action this evening, this would be a recommendation, no, excuse me, it would be Plan Commission action. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting approval to construct a 20-stall bicycle shelter at 200 Keenan Court. 200 Keenan Court is located in yellow on your screen. This is located north of the Pizza Ranch and also the True Studio, which is currently under construction. The proposed bike shelter would be located, like I said, on the north side of Keenan Court. So once again, Keenan Court is wrapping to the west here. True Studio is on the south. A future daycare is on the east side here, and the bike shelter would be in this location here. This would be operated by True Cycle. True Cycle is a part of the True Studio project, which is south of here. This would be a bike sharing program that they would be running out of their facility. So this would be, in essence, the home base, the kind of the mothership for the bike sharing program. Potentially, there would be other locations in the city that would be subject to the council approval as part of a potential agreement with the user. So this would be a private a bike sharing program that would be operated by the fitness studio. The proposed location of the shelter would be approximately 50 feet from Keenan Court. It would also then be placed in a spot that was planned for 4 parking stalls. Staff has no concerns with the placement of the shelter. It's in a logical location that's still located close to the studio. It's also located in a parking lot that needs additional buildings in it. The building on the west side here has not been proposed or provided to the Plan Commission yet. So if parking in this location becomes an issue, there is the opportunity to add additional parking when that site develops. Access to the site would remain unchanged from what was previously approved for the daycare. The design itself would be a typical bike shelter. It'd be approximately 270 square feet. Staff has no concerns with the design of it. The one condition that we'll recommend approval on, if we're recommending approval, would be that any signs on the structure be subject to the city's signage requirements. We just want to make sure that we avoid a potential situation of advertising and significant amounts of advertising for off-premise advertising being placed in the windows themselves. So with that, staff has no concerns with this shelter, and staff recommends the Plan Commission waive the initial review and approve the site plan to allow for the installation of a 20-stall bicycle shelter at 200 Keenan Court, with the following condition: that any signs on the structure shall be subject to the requirements of the city's signage requirements. I know the applicant is here tonight, and he'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions, comments, or motions at this time? Again, this is Plan Commission action. Mr. Manley, please.
Yeah, I've got a number of questions, and maybe the threshold question for me is whether or not, if you look at our ordinances, and we've got ordinances that speak to restrictions on outdoor storage of vehicles. And if you look at the definition of a vehicle in the zoning code, it talks about motorized or non-motorized vehicles that are capable of transporting people. And so it's not clear to me whether or not this type of a shelter is even allowed, certainly as a permitted use under the zoning code. can we talk a little bit about that?
Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Sure. I mean, I guess how I looked at this, I don't believe it's any different than a vehicle parking in here. So it's a bike sharing program, so the bikes will be going kind of traveling in and out as they're being used. So that was kind of the approach I took on this of you have vehicles parked here versus you have bicycles parked here.
But
They're
are
still
they
coming.
stored?
Well, the vehicles are parked there and the bikes are parked there. Now, in the winter, obviously you have True Studio across the street. That might be a question to the applicant if during non-use of, in the winter months, where would those be stored? But from a typical day-to-day parking standpoint, in my opinion, I think it's consistent with a vehicle in a parking lot.
Go ahead, Mr. Manley.
I guess I disagree. If you read the ordinance, I don't think your interpretation of it is correct, but I mean, it restricts in commercial areas the storage of any kind of vehicle that's not a car lot, like a car dealership, to something like 1 or 2 or 3 vehicles. And maybe the ordinance isn't a good ordinance, but that's what the ordinance says. So I think there's a problem there. And I think we should have the city attorney take a look at that, because I really don't believe that it's a use that's allowed under our zoning code.
Okay. Anything to add, Mr. Sayre?
I guess what section are you citing of the code? Is it 13-1-285? Exterior storage standards for residential and commercial districts?
It might be. I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay. I mean, so the definition there of a vehicle is any, and I'm just reading it so everybody is clear, is including but not limited to an automobile, truck, van, semi-tractor, bus, motorhome, pop-up camper, travel trailer, motorcycle, all-terrain vehicle, snowmobile, boat, race car, personal watercraft, tractor, or other motorized or non-motorized device or combination thereof used to transport people, cargo, or vehicles. So it does talk about storage of those. I guess the question that I would just raise is it really being stored there? Or is it just being parked there until someone rents it out? And I mean, we can have the attorney look at it, but from a standpoint of covered parking versus parking for bicycles, I guess that's just, is there a clear difference or not? And it's maybe an interpretation question, I guess. Like I said, from my opinion, it was a like-minded uses from that standpoint of you have covered parking for bicycles, you potentially have covered parking for vehicles. I mean, if they're being stored there for, and I'm sure there's a time period in here, which I would have to look through, but if it's being stored beyond that time period, then yes, it would be indicated that storage type use. If it's being used as a bike sharing program, people are checking them out on a regular basis, then it's more of that parking type use, but that's how I viewed it. But it is something, if the commission likes, we can have the attorney review that.
Why don't you go on, Mr. Manley?
Okay, I appreciate that. I think it's worth looking into, because I think we should, try and stay within the 4 corners of what our zoning ordinances say. And my reading of it is that that's not a use that's permitted. That said, even if we can overcome that question, I guess I have some questions, perhaps best addressed to the applicant, about what type of a business is envisioned here. Is this something where, is it like the city of Madison, where you swipe a credit card and you get on a bike and ride it around and bring it back to that same location? Or is it you ride it around and drop it off wherever you feel like it? Maybe you decide to leave it in front of a business. What is, are we going to have these bicycles just randomly sort of all over the city, or what is the, it wasn't clear to me from the proposal what is actually envisioned.
Mr. Manley has directed that question to the applicant, so if the applicant wishes to come forward and respond.
My name is Jerry Berkwin. I'm with Dimension for Architects in Madison, so I'm here more for the shelter itself, but I do know a little bit about the program. So you would access it by using actually an app on your cell phone. So that's how you would actually access that. My understanding is they are returned. Right now, this would be the only one here, so it actually would come back actually to that shelter. There's a second one that's being discussed actually in a park in downtown off the bike trail. That'd be at those 2 locations where the bikes would come back to after that when it's done.
Okay, thank you.
You also get, there's like helmets and other things that also come along as part of the total package. So.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Manley.
You know, when I looked at this proposal, it just struck me as odd because I understand that large cities like Madison, you know, maybe there's some demand for a bike sharing program. It just doesn't strike me as something that we would need in Verona. I guess as a matter of practicality, the location of this, I mean, if you think of where the nearest home is, I'm guessing it's Knoll Way to the west. I mean, are people going to drive their car here so that they can get out of their car and rent a bicycle? If not, where are they going to walk from? As I said, the nearest homes are probably at least a half a mile away. It just seems like a misfit for Verona. I hope the reason why we spend so much money building bike paths and bike lanes and bike trails is because people have bikes. If people don't have bikes, I would question why we're spending the money to build bike lanes and bike trails and so forth. So I just don't think, I don't believe that this is a permitted use under the zoning code, and I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's something that's necessary, and I think that the market would bear that out, and we're going to be stuck with a bike shelter in a parking lot that we don't need. And for that reason, I'm not going to support it.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Feedback? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure. I'll direct this, I guess, to either Mr. Manley or to Mr. Sayre. If the ordinance is determined by the city attorney to prohibit a shelter of this type, what would we need to do, or would the applicant need to do in order to permit a bike shelter at this site?
Mr. Sayre, please.
So assuming the city attorney finds that you can't construct or can't basically park bikes here, I mean, you could potentially run it out of the business, which obviously makes it more challenging from the standpoint of it's only going to be available when there's probably an attendant or someone there to handle that. I don't know. I mean, that's, I guess the short answer is I don't know off the top of my head of what the alternatives would be.
And I suppose one thing, though, would be that the ordinance could be amended to expressly permit this activity.
Correct. You could always do that too.
And I guess I asked the question because if there's and I'm not familiar enough with this particular ordinance to know what the likelihood is that the city attorney would find that the requested shelter would be prohibited. But if that's a likelihood, I would just suggest that we move ahead and talk to the Common Council, do what we would need to do in order to amend the ordinance to expressly allow a bike shelter like this. But I think it's a great idea.
Other feedback? Mr. Heinzen, Mr. Horsfeld, please.
Yeah, I'm in favor of this. I'm not speaking for Mr. Manley, but the people who are going to propose to do this think it's a viable option, and any Saturday or Sunday, you see people biking, and not everybody has a bike. So maybe somebody, a beautiful Sunday afternoon, drives over here, rides their bike around for a couple hours and brings it back. Some people may not have that option, and this would be, bring more people into the city, visit downtown. I think it's a good idea. You know, the location, maybe not the best, but hey, you gotta start someplace. So I'm in favor of this if we can figure out the ordinance thing.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Heinzen?
I'll just note that, I think that the location makes sense. It is sort of at the crossroads of two separate bike paths that come into the city, so. So I guess that's all I'd say. I think it makes sense, and I think, that we should look forward to this.
I would agree with Mr. Manley. I believe that we should have city attorney take a look at this and make sure that it is allowable under the current ordinances. If not, I personally don't have an issue amending the ordinances to allow this type of activity. One of the things that when I see, especially people that are staying at the hotels on the west side of Verona that are visiting, it's one of the things that they tell me that they would really like to see, and we don't have that as far as the city. So overall, I'm supportive of the program, but I want to make sure that legally that it's allowable before we move forward. Mr. Sarah, please.
I guess my only comment is if you're leaning towards approving it, I'd recommend adding a condition that the approval be subject to legal review, ensuring the use is an allowable use. So a condition to that effect, basically we've got the one condition, just add a second condition to it that, you know, the use is subject to the review of the city attorney.
Other thoughts, comments? I guess the other question that I have is how time sensitive this is, Mr. Sayre. If it's not time sensitive, I would prefer, rather than having a second condition, I would prefer to bring it back to a different meeting, to the next meeting. Mr. Manley?
Thank you. I just have one more question about our zoning code, and that is whether we require conditional use permits for outdoor sales.
Mr. Sayre?
So typically for like a business like Farm and Fleet, you know, if they're having some type of sale, we haven't done that. We've done temporary uses and temporary use permits in the past, but for ones that are, I guess, ongoing in that nature, like if it's you're referring to if it's a continuous ongoing sale, and I'm stalling because I'm looking it up as I'm talking to you. So I guess bear with me for 1 second. You know, we do have, obviously, you know, with uses, some of the outdoor areas, we don't have explicit, we have an outdoor display section of our ordinance which talks about, I believe, uses more typically associated with like a car dealership. You know, you have an outdoor area and display area for vehicles for sale or equipment of that nature. Typically in the past, though, we don't have anything clear cut in the ordinance exclusively for that. I mean, this is probably more classified as an accessory type use to a normal business operation. The short answer is we've just kind of allowed this in the past. And
Well, that wasn't what I asked. Do we have a conditional use requirement for outdoor sales? Because I remember granting them for Eichster's for selling vegetables outside.
correct, and that's one of those temporary type uses when it's a seasonal type approach as well. You know, exclusively for this type of use, if it was standalone by itself with nothing else on the parcel, it would be an outdoor display type use. That'd be the closest classification to it, which is a conditional use.
And this is not even on the parcel that's owned by the operator, correct?
The operator is leasing the parcel.
Okay.
So the parcel, it's not on the same parcel where the operator would be located, but this is an area that was identified as part of their lease with the owner for parking and also for potentially this.
Okay. I guess I think it would be worth asking the city attorney if somebody is allowed in the city of Verona to conduct outdoor sales on property that they don't own without a conditional use permit.
Thank you. Mr. Turk, please?
Yeah, I generally agree. Waiting to hear from the city attorney, but just a process question, since this hasn't really come up since I've been on the plan commission too much. When there is a gray area with the ordinance, have we moved the project along traditionally with a condition, or have we waited to hear back?
Mr. Sarah?
I think it depends on what the condition is and the comfort level of the plan commission ultimately. I mean, I think it also depends on the timeline. I'm not sure if Mr. Berkman can speak to that as well too.
The other thing I could bring up is I know they're actually working on the agreement then actually with the city on the whole bike share type of program. So until that actually, we wouldn't build this until that's agreed upon. So I think there probably is a certain amount of check and balance in there already that, you know, we're not going to go ahead with that unless the city actually, you know, wants us to do the project.
Mr. McCorsky, if you would, please.
And the city has not seen that agreement yet.
As I stated before, overall, I'm supportive of the program, but I think that there are some unanswered questions. Usually, I don't like to delay things, but there are some unanswered questions. We don't necessarily need a motion, but if we have consensus to bring this back at a future meeting, rather than taking any action this evening. I see Mr. Heinzen?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would we be able to, I guess question probably for Adam more than anybody else, but can we work with the city attorney so that the city attorney would have an opinion so that if it was possible to bring this back for the next meeting, it could be brought back for the next meeting?
I would be surprised if I don't have an opinion by the end of this week.
Okay, fine then, thanks.
All right, with consensus, we will move to the next agenda item. We will put this agenda, or this item back on the agenda for the next meeting. We are now on agenda item number 5, which we are not anticipating any action this evening. It is for the initial review for a proposed 120 to 140 unit senior living facility to be located at 841 North Main Street. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting an initial review to construct a 120 to 140 unit senior living facility at 841 North Main. 841 North Main is highlighted on your screen in yellow. It's immediately across from the middle school and also just south of First Choice Dental. The property is currently zoned mixed residential. As part of this process, the applicant would rezone the property to neighborhood office. The proposed use as a senior independent living development is classified as an institutional residential land use, and that is a conditional use permit within the neighborhood office classification. The Plan Commission did provide an initial review of a similar project in February of 2016. In 2016, a different applicant at the time was requesting an initial review of an 80 to 100 unit senior independent living facility at the same location. Comments from the Plan Commission included concerns about access to the property, traffic, and density. In general, most of the Plan Commission members were supportive of the use of the property as a senior housing facility, and they encouraged the applicant to meet with the neighbors. The applicant in this case for this project in 2017 did have a neighborhood meeting on March 30th at the Verona Public Library. The project that's before you tonight is on the screen. The proposed building would be set back approximately 55 feet from Main Street, 26 feet from the east property line, 40 feet from the north, and then 39 feet from the south property line. One comment from staff on the building setbacks is actually there is a 30-foot setback on the east side here, and the applicant will need to slightly adjust the building placement. The zoning ordinance from a density standpoint allows up to 50 dwelling units per acre for institutional residential land uses. The density of this project is currently between 38 and 45 units per acre and would be consistent with the neighborhood office classification. The applicant has indicated the building height is 35 feet as required by ordinance. In your packet, they did include a cross-section, which is on the screen before you tonight. This just shows a comparison of the proposed building height of the building and how it relates to First Choice Dental on the north, the existing barn that's on the property, and also the residential areas to the south. So it's intended just to provide a better understanding of the potential heights of this building. The proposed building would be 3 stories in height and would be that 35 feet. Access to the site, the applicant is proposing 2 access points from North Main. The southernmost access point would be a right in, right out. The northernmost access point would be a shared driveway with First Choice Dental. Most likely modifications to that driveway would be necessary to accommodate traffic from this facility and also the dental clinic as well. And those are details that we would work out as if the project moves forward. The design of the building, the applicant provided some conceptual renderings in the submittal. To be honest, these are a little difficult to kind of fully understand and kind of detail out what the materials would be. You know, as the project moves forward, staff recommends that the project would need to contain a significant amount of brick and stone that would provide a strong visual presence along Main Street. I think staff at the time right now recommends too that the applicant is encouraged to kind of vary the architecture. The proposed design before you tonight is rather, say, flat at times. It doesn't have much changes in any building elevations, so it'd be nice to have the applicant break up the building and try to provide a more residential type character to it and kind of move away from the kind of the institutional type look of it. Landscaping, as part of the project, the applicant is proposing a significant amount of landscaping along the east property line. As part of this, the applicant is looking to place that landscaping on city-owned property to the east. So the city owns a strip of land that's approximately 50 feet wide between this site and the residential areas to the east. We have utilities in the ground in that location. Staff is open to this kind of concept of placing the landscaping on city property, but we'd want to have additional discussions and conversations with the applicant about that before we would fully agree to that idea. As the Plan Commission is aware, we do have a residential phasing policy that's been in place since 2012, which generally restricts the number of multifamily units that can be approved each year to 25 to 50 units. There is an exemption to that policy, which includes assisted living and nursing home facilities. This proposed senior housing facility would meet that requirement and could be exempted from the policy. Comments from staff is that staff continues to support a potential senior housing living facility on this property. We feel it provides a smooth transition between the residential uses to the east and also the obviously school uses to the west. A couple things that we would insist on seeing on this project if it does move forward. First one would be a joint driveway with First Choice Dental. That is the only viable option to have a full access driveway or full access to the site, so that would have to be shared with First Choice Dental. Second, if the project moves forward, we would recommend that a deed restriction be placed on the property restricting the units to 55 plus. Just looking at this site, we would want to make sure that it's limited because of the parking that's on the property and just kind of what's being proposed here in 2017. And finally, staff does have a concern about the overall density of the project. The last project we looked at was between 80 and 100 units. I think the current proposal at 120 to 140 units is too much for the neighborhood, especially to the east as well. So staff is more comfortable with that approximately 80 unit range that was previously discussed in 2016. I know the applicant is here tonight. They'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and staff would be happy to answer any questions you have too. So the Plan Commission is encouraged to review the materials and provide feedback to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah. Questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just from a land use standpoint, when we reviewed the prior iteration of this project, I felt at the time that we were in danger of using our very limited inventory of commercial land use along our main north, south, and east, west corridors, and for retail and business office and so forth. So I was a little bit concerned about having a senior living facility in that location. I'm a little bit less concerned about that given some of the other commercial infill that we've seen from some of the projects over the last few months. But I still have concern about the density of this particular proposal. I think, frankly, it's too dense, and I think our experience has been when we try and shoehorn a large multifamily development into an existing neighborhood, that a lot of times that creates conflicts. So that's I guess my initial thought on it from a density and land use standpoint. In terms of the architecture of it, I agree with what Adam said, and I guess my feeling is that if you're going to put a 3-story apartment complex essentially in this area, that perhaps you should have a pitched roof. I think it would probably blend in a lot better with the architecture that's already there. A lot of the homes and businesses in this part of the city have a pitched roof, and I think it would just probably look better in that area if this building had a pitched roof as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other feedback? Just, I'll ask a question for Mr. Sayre or Mr. Mompass, please. I just want to make sure that our public safety folks have looked at this as far as the ingress and egress and just being able to get to the building if need be.
You're talking about, I assume, fire and EMS?
Fire, EMS,
I believe the applicant had some conversations, or we're looking to have some conversations with those, and I think they're probably ongoing, as far as I know, and he's shaking his head yes, but
Okay.
there have been some initial conversations. I know that was a concern from the applicant from the get-go on this project, of making sure that the fire department would be satisfied with the access to the building, and so I know it's a conversation that's still going forward, but there have been some that have been ongoing.
Okay, thank you. Other feedback? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure. Has there been discussion yet of what will happen to the middle school, high school after the new school is built? With the property, is it just going to remain as institutions for some other purpose? Or is it going to be land that's likely to be developed?
Mr. Sayre?
Well, my understanding, just kind of from the referendum, was the middle school will be turned into an elementary school, and then the high school will be converted into a middle school. Yeah, and then I think the K-wing was maybe up in question of what happens to the K-wing, just because of the age and condition of it, but that's my understanding. So my understanding is that it's going to remain as is, and it's not going to redevelop, at least anytime soon.
Other questions, other feedback? Mr. Horsfall, please.
I agree with the concern of the density. It's interesting that it's allowed under the ordinance that they can have as much as 50 units per acre. But in that neighborhood, and when I saw a 3-story building, even though it was a nice graphic showing the elevation view, it just seems too big for that area to be a 3-story. Realizing that we had 3-story if you go farther north next to residential, so in somewhat of an apartment building. My gut feeling is that the density is too great, and the size of the building just doesn't fit kind of within the smaller sized houses and duplexes that are in that area. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Heinzen. Mr. Horsfall, that's the second time I've done that tonight. Any other feedback? Just one, perhaps a follow-up question to Mr. Manley's question regarding the pitch roof. Mr. Sarah, if a pitched roof were added to the building, would that create any problems with the height?
Yes, that was kind of the initial conversation I had with the applicant. I was kind of looking at the height, and that would create a need potentially for a PUD or some type of exception to that height requirement with a three-story building. So that was kind of, when I spoke with the applicants initially, it was, my advice to them was to, stick to the requirements of the zoning ordinance and, meet those standards that we have in place. But yeah, if it went to some type of pitched roof with the current kind of three-story design, it wouldn't meet that 35 feet. It would have we'd either have to do a PUD or some type of other process to get around that.
Okay, great, thank you. Other feedback? I know the applicant is here. I'm going to ask them if they have anything that they wish to add.
Good evening.
Good
Thank you,
evening.
Mayor. Ron Henshaw with Ford Development Group. Just a couple of opening comments, I guess, and we anticipated a few of the comments on density, just so that you're aware. First of all, we were brought this property. The previous developer chose not to move forward, and as a result of that, the project became available and was brought to our attention. We're excited about the project. We think it's an ideal location for a senior housing facility for a variety of reasons. One of them actually relates to the traffic, and with the adjacent schools, even if they change to an elementary and moving the middle school, there's still significant traffic, and this would be a facility that at those key times in the morning and in the afternoons would not contribute to the traffic. Other types of facilities would. So early in the morning, late in the afternoon, there'll be nominal traffic that will be generated from this facility. So from that perspective, it's an excellent location. In addition, the proximity to other services that are required by seniors, being just adjacent to the downtown area, short commute to groceries, pharmacy, the senior center's close. So we believe this is an ideal location. Now, that being said, one of the challenges of the site is that there's about 20 feet of fall from the opening of the driveway at where First Choice General comes in to the other side of the site. And working with that and trying to deal with that 20 feet of fall, as well as making sure that we have adequate housing, is the reason why we indicated on the site plan somewhere between 120 and 140 units. The rendering that you see actually that was sent along was rendered at 135 units. We just recently received a market study as it related to senior housing. One of our concerns was there recently was a new facility built just down the road, and we wanted to see how it was absorbing, what the mix was, and so forth, and we have that information. And I just ask you to reserve any final decisions on the density until we have a chance to thoroughly vet it, sort through it, make sure that we know and understand what we're recommending to you. And when we come back for our conditional use and site plan approvals, we'll have specific information to you then in regards to the density and why we're recommending it at the level that it's recommended. We're looking at independent living, assisted living. In the study actually indicated that memory care was being absorbed in the community faster than a couple of the others, which was a little bit of a noteworthy for us. So we're in the process of choosing the operator. We've interviewed a half dozen to 10 operators. They will be involved in the process of helping us with unit mix, sizing, and so forth. So that's the background of the project. We do believe somewhere in excess of that 100 unit would be needed and required as it relates to the property itself. And then I have Kevin Yeska from JSD Professional Services here who can answer any specific questions about site plan, the architectural components, and things of that nature. So I'll have him speak to any of those. Do you have any direct questions for me?
Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you. Just curious whether or not you've given consideration to having commercial property, like on the first floor, that would, I guess, be helpful for the population that was living there.
We, the plan is, as with any good senior facility, there'll be amenities on site that would be helpful to the seniors that are there, that could include some commercial components such as you know, hair salon and other things of that nature. The one other thing I'll mention, not as it specifically relates to that, but as I think about that, one of the things that we're also looking at and likely would happen is that it would more than likely be a phased type of build. It wouldn't be a situation where we would build all of those units initially. We're taking a look at how we could build the facility such that it could absorb and then have a second phase. The market research that we received indicated that in the Verona market, there's approximately 60 units a year of absorption that will continue to increase, of course, as the population ages. So that's one key piece I can provide tonight in regards to the absorption. So we're looking at the other units around, how they're absorbing, where they're at, the types of units, so that when we come back, we can be more specific.
Other questions for Mr. Hinshaw? Just, Ron, perhaps a comment. I know you mentioned that you'd be available to answer any questions regarding the quality of the building. I think you've been around here before, so you know what we're looking for as far as quality. And I know the Planning Commission feels this way, as well as the Common Council, that we're looking for high-quality products, something that's going to be around for a long time. And I guess I do have one other question. You said you were meeting with some potential operators. So is this something that a property that you plan on holding on to for a long time? You're not looking at building it and then turning it over to someone else?
No, we would be the developer and the owner, at least partial owner, I guess I should say, but choosing a high-quality operator, and that will be dependent. We've interviewed independent living operators, those that have combined independent and assisted, and those that have memory care, and everybody has their own niche in regards to specialty. And once we figure out that mix, then the operator will be chosen who is tailored toward that mix. I want to address the pitch roof real quick. We looked at that and had access to the previous plans, and they were very well done. Part of the challenge that we had, and ultimately will determine the final design, of course, is the number of units with the height requirements, the fall of the way the site falls from one end to the other. That we chose to go with the design that we have right now based on the number of units, as I mentioned, was showing. We're still looking at internal floor plans, figuring those things out.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Not, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Just in general, any other feedback, comments? Seeing none, we will look for further information on that down the road, and we will move to agenda item number 6, which again, we're not looking at any action this evening. This will be a planned unit developed concept located at 102/104 Lincoln Street that would allow for the construction of 113 apartment units. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting a concept plan unit development review at 102-104 Lincoln Street. The plan development process is a 4-step process. The concept review before the Plan Commission and the Council is step 2 of the process. If the project moves forward, it will go to step 3, which is the general development plan, where potential zoning entitlements are granted, and then step 4, which is the precise implementation plan, the PIP, where the project is fully approved and the applicant can then pull building permits. So tonight, this is a concept review. The Plan Commission has the ability to discuss the project. The project will then go to the Common Council next week for the same conversation with discussion and no action. So the applicant is looking for a conceptual review to construct 113 apartment units on Lincoln Street. The property is currently used by Secor Manufacturing as a light industrial land use. Secor leases the property, and when their lease expires or they move out, it would be this project could potentially move forward. The proposed project is 3 separate buildings. Building A on the site plan before you would be 3 stories tall. Building B would be 4 stories, and Building C would be 2 stories. Building setbacks were not included on the conceptual site plan, but it does appear the applicant has identified a 15-foot setback from Lincoln Street. This property is not located within our downtown overlay, but it is adjacent to properties that are within that overlay district, including the fire station and the VACT theater across the street, and also the properties to the north along Verona Avenue. Staff is comfortable with that 15-foot setback, as it would be consistent with other properties within the area. One comment that we would have on this would be that for the property or this building that abuts the residential area to the west, we would recommend a significant amount of landscaping be added along that west property line to screen this project and the buildings from the adjacent residential areas. The site itself also has 2 existing stormwater sewer easements on the property. The larger of the 2 is running kind of through the site in this location. There's a dashed line on the site plan. That contains a 60-inch pipe that helps convey stormwater from the northern part of the city. It's located north of East Verona Avenue, ultimately to the, there's a ditch, channelized ditch that runs south of this site and ultimately kind of back behind here to City Hall. There's also a 42-inch pipe that comes from the east-west here, once again into that same ditch, and conveys water from the kind of the downtown area to the area behind City Hall as well. The applicant is proposing to keep the existing easements in place. Modifications will be necessary for those easements. One comment from staff is we'd like to see this building C pulled further off that easement location. In the event in the future we have to kind of get into that area, we'd just like to have additional space for our equipment and our operations for ease of movement and not to potentially damage the building. Overall, the site is providing 209 parking spaces. 88 spaces are on the surface. 121 spaces are underground. I think initially staff has no concerns with the parking on the site. Access to the site, the applicant is proposing 1 access from Lincoln Street. Staff doesn't have any concerns with the location of that access. The only comment that we have at this time is there's the opportunity potentially in the future for lands north of here to redevelop due to the fact that when that does happen, we will most likely attempt to restrict access onto East Verona Avenue, similar to other projects. We'd like this to be a future shared access point for this project in this location, and also potentially the redevelopment of these lands to the north as well. That's a detail that can be worked out kind of as the project goes forward, but we just wanted to point that out to the Plan Commission. Conceptual designs were included in the Plan Commission packets. The buildings will have a prairie-style architecture with a strong street presence along Lincoln Street, and with some potential kind of walk-up units facing Lincoln Street. In general, staff doesn't have a concern with the kind of the design of the buildings. They'll contain a significant amount of brick and composite siding, so it does have high-quality materials. Once again, the middle building, which is currently 4 stories, staff doesn't support a 4-story building in this location, and feels that it should be at least a 3-story building. As the Plan Commission is aware, the city does have a residential phasing policy that targets 25 to 50 new multifamily units each year. One of the exceptions of the policy, and there are 3 exceptions, includes downtown redevelopment. While this property is possibly not technically in the downtown, it is within the downtown area, so this project does have the ability to be exempted from that phasing policy. Property was included in our downtown mobility and development plan that was adopted in March of 2014. The downtown plan recommended this property be redeveloped in the future with multifamily land use and with 72 multifamily units at a density of approximately 20 units per acre. The applicant is proposing a density of 31.2 dwelling units per acre. Staff believes the redevelopment and use of this property as a multifamily use is consistent with the downtown plan, but the overall density of the project is inconsistent with that plan. It's too dense. In your packet, I also did include a list of other projects that are in the city, along with their densities as well. I won't go through those, but it was more just for a comparison of projects the city has approved over the last few years and as it relates to their density. Comments from staff on this project include that staff does support the redevelopment of this project as a multifamily land use. So we support that it being redeveloped from the current light industrial use to an apartment use. With that said, staff does not support the density as it's been submitted today. We'd be more comfortable with the density that's more consistent with what was recommended in that downtown plan. Further, staff will not support a 4-story building in this location. I think it's out of character and it just doesn't fit. So this is a conceptual review tonight. I know the applicant is here and they're looking for feedback. I know they're kind of open to kind of what comments and ideas the Plan Commission has and suggestions the Plan Commission has for them. So that staff does recommend the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. And as I said previously, this will also go to the Common Council next Monday for discussion as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, we will open it up for feedback. Questions or comments? Questions or comments? Mr. Horsfall, please.
I agree with staff's opinions on this. I don't like 4 stories and I don't like the density. So, but I like the idea of having apartments kind of in this area across from the VAC and stuff like that. So, in support of with the project, but just the density and the height is what I'm looking to change.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other feedback? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I share the concerns about density and the height of the building. I think if it would be hard for me, given all of the other multifamily that we have approved in the city, for me to be supportive of this project. I just think we're approving way too much. I think if you look at the material that's later on in our agenda that Adam provided for us, looking at the over the past 5 or 6 years, the balance between multifamily and single family, it's been very much lopsided toward multifamily, and that doesn't even account for the the projects that we've been talking about thus far this year. So I think we run this a very real risk of kind of overloading on multifamily, and I think at some point we have to say no, and I just think this is too much.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other feedback? If not, I know the applicant's here. I don't know if they wish to come forward.
Thank you very much. My name is Randy Bruce. I'm with Canothie and Bruce Architects. I also have Dave Keller here representing the developer as well. I appreciate the comments and the time this evening for your review. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the developer and the project, items that we really can't communicate with the drawings. The developer, John Dome, and his son Jake have owned and operated the Prairie Crest apartment development here in Verona for a number of years. They're approaching 20 years at this point. It's stayed in the family. It's had very successful management. Obviously, they're long-term owners and developers. This particular site, they look at as really the next step and kind of a legacy project for their family. They've instructed us to do a very high quality job in terms of the design, in terms of materials. You can see we've got quite a bit of brick. The articulation on the exterior and that prairie style design is an expensive design, but it speaks to the quality that they want to try to achieve here. And part of what part of the reason that they want to do that is they're really looking at trying to get a good quality tenant and a tenant profile that's going to be solid for the long term. So they've asked us to put in the amenity package that really creates that demand from that kind of tenant. We've got a pool, clubhouse, facilities, exercise rooms, on-site management, leasing offices, management offices, all on-site. And to do that kind of job, to create that kind of high-quality project, it isn't density so much that we're after as getting to a kind of a threshold level of units. We need to get to a certain level of units so that we can create the amenities and afford to create that kind of high-quality development. That's why we've kind of proposed this the development. We understood that the 72 were initially proposed. We certainly want to work with the city and do a good job here. But we are going to be asking for some understanding as to why we are asking for that. We really want to do a good job, and to do that, we feel like we need to get to this threshold number of units. In terms of the other comments that Adam had, in terms of the shared access, I think we can work that out. And in terms of creating some more space along that easement for the most westerly building, I think we can do that as well. We'll certainly take under advisement the concerns that you have about the building height, the 4 stories. We propose that 4-story building in that particular location because we didn't feel that it would be very impactful or visible from the surrounding areas. You see, from Lincoln Street, you'd have to be seeing past and over the 3-story building that fronts Lincoln, or from the west, the 2-story building. So it's been internalized. The bike trail on the far south end sits much higher. So we felt that might be one location where the city could accept a 4-story structure. But again, we're certainly, we'll take a look at that as we move forward. And I don't have any other comments. Dave, would you like to?
Can I use this?
You
Is
sure
that
can,
okay?
Dave.
I think Randy hit it pretty well. It's kind of interesting. The last time I was before you, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it was like 10 years ago when we were developing the city center condominiums down off of Main Street next to the senior center. And there was a lot of discussion about height in that building, and that's turned out very well. Matter of fact, there's all but 1 unit has been sold, and it's been a wonderful collection of new residents in downtown. And I know the Millers and some of the other retailers on Main Street are very happy with the fact that there has been some new development down there. And I think that's what really brings to this site. John Dome would have liked to have been here, but he is out of town. I can tell you that he is looking at doing nothing but a first-class development with first-class materials all the way through, not just on the exterior, not just in the landscaping, but also in the finish package in the development itself. What drives his ability to do that is the number of units. And so there is a threshold number of units. Now, I know when the city put together your plan for the 72 units conceptually drawn in the downtown plan, there probably wasn't a hard and fast financial analysis as to see what kind of a development you could get with 72 units. That those extra units are what allow him or allow the developer here to provide really high level quality legacy, strong word, but legacy type development for this site. And I think John's reputation with 20 years in this community, running a very quality, and 40 years in the real estate management business, running a very quality type business. Things like on-site permanent management, clubhouse, high quality materials, staying in the family for generations is the type of thing that this project brings. It's actually very exciting. I think it's going to lend tremendous amount of positive energy for further redevelopment, like your downtown plan called for some of the properties fronting on Verona Avenue. So John wanted me to relay those thoughts. We've been involved in a lot of urban redevelopment sites throughout Madison and Dane County, and this will rank right up there with them.
Thank you. Other feedback, comments? I'm not seeing any, so what I would just add, we don't have public comment at the Plan Commission meeting. I apologize. I would just add my comments that I'm supportive of development in this area, and I would hope that we'd continue to have conversations, work through the staff, and we look forward to seeing something back on a future agenda. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, and for those that wanted to comment, we have a public hearing coming up on a specific issue, and there we could have comment there. But we wanted to make you aware that next Monday the council is meeting, and there's always public comment at the council meeting if you wish to do that. Okay. Thank you. Agenda item number 7. We're not looking at any action here this evening as well. This would be a presentation by MSA Professional Services regarding the draft Northwest Neighborhood Plan maps and policies. I see Jason here.
Yeah, so tonight we have
Go ahead, Mr. Sayre.
Tonight we have Jason Valerius from MSA. Jason and MSA have been helping us to create the kind of documents that have been included in your Plan Commission packet. Jason's here tonight, and he'll be providing a short presentation kind of what was in your packet and some additional background information. And Jason, I do have a... The pointer doesn't work, so I don't point to anything. I'll use the mouse. So just tell me.
Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. All right. So this is your first look at a very rough first draft of the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. It's pretty basic and straightforward. We're going to just lay out a little bit of data, especially in map form of the planning area, and talk about some basic land use policies and design guidelines. As you know, this has been I guess it's fair to point out that this has been instigated because the city has seen a preliminary, some preliminary ideas for one of the properties at the intersection of Shady Oak Lane and PD. And the intent of this neighborhood plan is to explore how a cohesive neighborhood for this whole area could be moved forward that could incorporate that proposal or some version of it. And so that was our attempt thus far, is to build a cohesive neighborhood around that. And so we can talk about some of the policies that would be required to approve that project and other lands around it. So this, just a few maps here, existing land use. Most of it is in ag land, currently being farmed. And then the other major chunk of land is in woodland. You'll see in the upper right corner of the planning area, there's about 40 acres, a little less than that, that's in yellow. This is Dane County data that we started with. I think that really should also be showing up as woodland because it is all wooded up there. This planning area is roughly about 700 acres, just to give you some context about how much land we're talking about. Yep, go ahead.
Just jump in real quick. If you want to go back, I can go. Actually, I can do it. This is also the area B within our kind of boundary agreement with the township. So that is a joint interest area that we have with the township. So this is MSA's directive has been kind of to look at this B area that's located north of County Highway PD. So the basis of the boundaries, as we've talked about before, is based upon that boundary agreement that we adopted last year.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So the northern and western boundaries of this area correspond exactly to Area B, and what is outside, further north, further west, is the what's known as the town protected area.
Go ahead, Mr. Manley.
Thank you. Just for my own clarification, is any of the study area within an existing urban service area?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No.
No, okay. Thank you.
Site conditions that could constrict development in various ways. You see in this exhibit a strip of blue down the middle. That's a drainage way, which isn't often showing a lot of water, but is clearly a floodplain, so that it is wet at times during heavy rain events. So that's really the low point of the study area. To the west, you see an area in kind of a faint purple, the western strip of 40 acre squares, and that area has been designated as potentially difficult to serve with water service because that's all above 1,048 elevation. So there's some question marks about being able to serve that with city water. On the east end, if you look carefully, the area that is along Woods Road and north of the ridge line, so you'll see that there's kind of a diagonal line running through from PD and over to the sharp curve in Shady Oak Lane. That's a steep ridge line there, and uphill of that ridge line, meaning to the northeast, is an area that also would not be able to be served by the current water system. That's all above 1,100 feet in elevation. And so the city's had a prior study done for this whole part of the city by AECOM that shows that that area would need to be its own water area with a water tower assumed to be able to serve that. I think that pretty much encapsulates, obviously we have a ridge line that runs all the way through, continues there along Shady Oak Lane, so some pretty strong glacial features there. I would also point out that there are some pockets of hydric soils and wetland points. Again, this is data that we collected from the DNR. It's kind of a warning for anyone that would want to develop their land that, well, there could be something there, and some further investigation would be needed. As a reference map, we included an indication of property ownership. I think the main thing to point out is that for the bulk of the area that could be developed, we're talking about 6-7 owners. So there's a fairly small number of people that control this land right now. And then this is the one I'll spend the most time on. This is our preliminary draft of potential land uses for the area. What you're seeing is a lot of light yellow, which we've labeled as low density, with a tentative density range of up to 5 units per acre. You're seeing a smaller amount of medium density residential around the that proposed project, and a few other lands that are at the corner of PD and Shady Oak Lane that we've designated as commercial and mixed use. In rough acreages, we're talking about roughly 70 acres of commercial and mixed use, roughly 100 acres of that medium density residential, and then the low density residential, I would say roughly 360 acres, and I'll point out that I'm not including all of the lands in that. So we haven't assumed a lot of development potential for the lands that are between Shady Oak Lane and Woods Road, that are kind of isolated back there. However, the properties that are along Woods Road are presumed as having development potential. As a generalization about these lands and the landowners, Adam and I together interviewed many of the landowners, and it's worth pointing out that most of the landowners in this area could be characterized as investors. We don't have anyone that is, plans to die on their land in these larger ownerships. So just want to make you aware of the general mindset of the people that are owning these lands. In terms of the potential roadways and You know, you can see some new roads proposed and also some road connections indicated simply by arrows pointing into these lands. And, you know, simply trying to establish a basic street network. Nothing all too noteworthy there, except that I would point out that we have lined up a street with Country View Road, and I guess the long-term future of Country View Road could change. Right now, Epic owns a good portion of the land around that road and is addressing some issues that concern them in terms of the traffic on that road of their own, you know, that comes from their facility. And so there's been some casual talk, I think, about maybe improving the road or even realigning the road for safety, pushing it further to the east. Maybe even that road goes away entirely if Epic someday owns everything around it. But that's casual talk, not something that is actually been proposed. So that would affect potentially where roads would align to the north from that. The other thing that's noteworthy from our conversations with Epic is that you see that there's west of the drainage way, we're showing a road that connects to the to PD, and Epic has talked about having a north entrance directly onto PD, and it would be the intent that that would align with that entrance. The layout of uses here, you're seeing, of course, that dark orange, reddish color, which is the commercial mixed use. And the proposal that's been put out there is for some fairly high density development on that site. And with that in mind, we definitely wanted to try to transition the intensities of use and height and density from that down to lower density use, which is why you see this pattern of medium density wrapped around that and then lower density further out. Another thing I'd like to point out is the strip of green that you see along the north side of PD, west of the drainage way. The intent there is that for any development that would occur west of that drainage way, that it would be set back further from PD, and that transition point as you cross the drainage way and go further west would be transitioning from a more urban to a less urban character, with development pushed further back from the roadway. One other item to point out here, just because I think it could lead to some differences in how this develops, is the area, Adam, if you could point out the property with the deed restriction north of the Legends Edge development, right there, that property has a deed restriction that prevents pretty much any kind of development right now. And the City of Madison would need to agree to release that restriction for that property to develop. We have assumed more urban uses in case that should come to be, so that there would be some intent in place for those lands, but as of right now, it would be very difficult, pending the cooperation of the City of Madison, for that particular property to develop. So a few things about design guidelines. This isn't by no means a holistic list of design guidelines. What we would include in the plan would be a little bit more comprehensive, but we picked out a few things that we felt were of greatest importance to result in a cohesive neighborhood out here and to respond to the overall setting, kind of transitioning from out toward the edge. I think this neighborhood plan, because if I go back to the map and point out the lands to the north and to the west, there's not a whole lot more additional room for development beyond these edges, and that's starting to fill in even currently within town jurisdiction. So I think it's reasonable to assume that in this direction, this is close to the long-term edge of the city, most likely. So you know, we're looking for a form that makes sense long-term as the build-out of this area of the city and town. So Design guidelines, one that we wanted to point out, all development should front onto a public street with a visual connection between the street and the building, excluding those that are adjacent to County Highway PD or Shady Oak Lane. So the point there being that while we want to establish street frontages with buildings actually facing a street, we don't intend that to happen on PD or even likely on Shady Oak, that would be a walkable street where you walk down the sidewalk and you're looking into the shop fronts or you're looking into front doors. We think that the building should be fronted more internally within the neighborhood rather out onto those current streets right now. Parking between the street and the building is strongly discouraged. This is kind of a basic urban design principle, but one that we'd like to reinforce in this neighborhood. And next one here, that accepting lands above the ridge line along Woods Road, all other parts of this neighborhood will be connected by roads, sidewalks, and paths, and designed to be a cohesive neighborhood. For trips between residential and commercial areas within this neighborhood, it should not be necessary to travel on County Highway PD or Shady Oak Lane. What we're trying to do here is to ensure that as individual pieces of this overall area develop, that it develops cohesively as a neighborhood rather than as isolated pieces that aren't connected, but we are acknowledging also that that ridge line is sort of a natural barrier, and what happens above that ridge line is harder to keep connected in that same way. Developments adjacent to County Highway PD or Shady Oak Lane should be oriented toward internal streets with views of rear yard utility and parking areas screened from those streets using landscaping and berms. These pictures aren't maybe the best pictures to illustrate this, but kind of reinforcing what I already said. Buildings should be more internally focused within the neighborhood, and then we want to pay some attention to what that appearance is from PD and Shady Oak. Just a couple more slides here. Actually, last slide, excuse me. The maximum height of development will be 3 stories and 35 feet in the residential areas. That it would include both the low and medium density, both the yellow and light orange, and 5 stories and 65 feet in mixed use areas. And then a further policy that the city will consider proposals for additional building height up to 65 feet in the medium density residential areas and up to 100 feet in the mixed use areas for high quality design that meets the design standards in this plan, especially including, and we list a few examples of things that you'd be looking for to allow greater height. So high quality landscaping and site design to hide parking and utilities, excellent bike and pedestrian amenities, dark sky compliant exterior lighting, and muted colors and non-reflective siding and glazing, especially above the ground floor. So one of the things that we've been thinking about and paying attention to is that the proposal that's been floated is for buildings up to 100 feet in height with a significant number of units. And we looked for some examples in the region that you might be familiar with to give you a sense of what a 100-foot building looks like. And this building in the lower right is not a residential building, which is what the taller buildings in that draft proposal were to be, but rather an office building. This is the office building that is just west of Greenway Station in the city of Middleton. So maybe a slightly different character because of the different use, but in terms of height, I think that's pretty close to 100 feet. The upper right picture is on Monroe Street. That's the Trader Joe's building, and that's a 5-story and roughly 65-foot building. So trying to give you some cues from the local area to give you a sense of what we're talking about when we say 65 feet or 100 feet. So that's the extent of it right now. We didn't feel that we need to get into a whole lot of detail because we felt some pretty fundamental questions, especially the issues of intensity and height that we would like some feedback on so that we can come forward later into this process with a draft plan that is likely to proceed favorably. So I would appreciate some discussion and feedback tonight.
Jason, can you go back to, it would be your last map, the one prior to the design guidelines? One more back. That map?
Yes.
And I know you said this, so in the yellowish color, you said as far as density, up to 5 units per acre?
Yeah, that was the initial
And
suggestion.
did you give us a number for the brownish oranges and
I
the reddish?
didn't. 5 to 10 units per acre was the suggested range in the orange, the medium
orange.
density.
Okay. All right. Other feedback? Mr. Horsfall, please.
With that said, so just to throw it into a zoning kind of, so low density below 5 acres, is that neighborhood residential, or would we have to write a different zoning for that low density?
So let me clarify that it's not up to 5 acres, it's up to 5 units
5 units per acre.
per acre.
So is that neighborhood residential? Is the orange color something community residential?
I think you've got compatible districts, but I'm going to lean on Adam here to fill in.
Yes, correct. So we have community residential, which I think is up to 6 DUs per acre, and then neighborhood residential is typically 4 DUs per acre.
Okay.
I think as Jason and I have kind of talked about this residential area, especially as you transition to the west, and you've got the kind of that purple area in there that obviously there'd have to be additional studying of can we even serve that and how that transition with the town. I think at least I've looked at this, and I'm sure Jason's going to agree with this, is it's kind of the overall of this whole area. So you may have some areas that have a lower type density to it with some maybe larger lots in there, but as you kind of transition, especially to the east and areas that abut that oranger area, I think you're going to have those kind of the higher densities. At least that's been my kind of intention with it. The orange one, to kind of slot that into a category, I think you'd probably looking at the most likely the urban residential classification, which typically has up to 12 DUs per acre. But once again, as you kind of look at these properties, the ones along Woods Road, they have some features, environmental features in there, and then obviously you have features as well through these sites as well too of just constrictions with regards to environmental things out there as well. So if today we had to slot them in, yeah, we'd slot probably the brown into that potentially that urban residential classification, potentially the mixed residential, but most likely urban residential.
Mr. Horsfall?
As long as I'm talking. Do you know what the future of PD is? Any chance that's going to be like an urban roadway?
Mr. Sarah?
Or
You said PD?
McKee, yeah.
McKee, yeah. So the city is currently reconstructing County Highway PD from approximately this location east to Woods Road as part of the Nine Mountain Road Northern Lights project. County Highway M will be reconstructed starting late this year and also in 18 and 19. And that will also include, I think, approximately 1,000 feet west, give or take, of the intersection of M and PD. So you'll have that kind of piece between M and Woods Road, and that would potentially be reconstructed in the next, say, couple of years, potentially by the city as well.
Right, but
So
I assume it's a rural section.
it'll be urbanized.
So
It'll-
it's curb and a median and 2 lanes of traffic and
Bike lanes,
lanes.
off-street bike accommodations on the south side as well too, on the south side of PD. But it'll have the full urbanized section, similar to McKee. Well, more like McKee as you go east in the Fitchburg, east of Seminole Highway. It's similar to kind of that type of character. So between Seminole and Fish Hatchery, it'll be different than that because of the bike lanes and the off-street bike accommodations, but generally that kind of look with a median in the middle, and you'd have curb and gutter on both sides and 4 lanes.
And no parking.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Heinzen, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any chance, and we probably don't have it tonight, but to see a map with the north neighborhood together with the northwest? Just get a sense, and I guess the part of it that I'm most interested about is just the part that's across McKee Road from where Woods Road is, to see how well that, I guess, dovetails with what's on this plan here.
Go ahead, Mr. Sarah.
I can speak to that. So the property across from Woods is currently the church. That's up there right now. That's continued to be planned and used as a institutional church type use. The Denner property is located east of there. It's been planned as residential. I don't know if that was wooded residential or if that was just a residential classification. That one I don't know off the top of my head. The lands to the east of there are currently located in the town. It's a smaller town type subdivision. I think there's 4 or 5 town lots in there. And then pretty much everything from Nine Mound, Northern Lights, west to Country View was planned as what we identified as office, as a potential Epic type use as well.
And I would just add to that, Mr. Heinzen, we're talking about off of Northern Lights and south of McKee, so south of the Lutheran church there, that there'd be more than likely another street going to the east into the north neighborhood.
And that's where the pit is right now? And
Correct.
that's going to be parkland at some point, or
Correct.
a piece of it at least? Okay.
Correct. Further questions, comments? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You had mentioned that the strip of green to the north of PD was intended to be a development setback, and I'm wondering why it wasn't considered for commercial development, given that it's on a county trunk highway and will be, with the exception of the floodplain that's immediately to the west of the high density proposal that we've seen, it would essentially be adjacent to that.
Sure. So we certainly have, I think, a good chunk of commercial area right now designated, and I think the intent was to concentrate that further to the east than to strip it out and continue to extend it further to the west. I think that's a plausible scenario, in that it, commercial could exist out there. This was our take on what we think would make for a good neighborhood and a good character out here. Those are the rationales behind our proposing it in this way.
Mr. Sarah, please.
I'll jump in as well too. Jason and we did speak about this. I think as we looked at this too, I think both of us had a concern with the amount of traffic that drops off, especially at Northern Lights, and then at some point in the future potentially the kind of the Epic North entrance here. I mean, there's a very significant amount of traffic drop off, and I think the question also was just the viability of commercial there, and I guess also what type of commercial you're going to potentially get out there. Is it going to? It's not. I think it was questionable what kinds you're going to have, just because you won't have the traffic volume out in that area to kind of generate potential demand. You'll have the traffic in this location because of kind of what's occurring at Epic, but I think as you go west, there's just a significant drop off, and it was just, as Jason said, we decided to kind of concentrate it versus spreading it. But I do think it's a big question of, if you do plan commercial in this location, I don't know what kind we're going to get, and if that's really what the city or planning commission wants to see.
Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you. Just to follow up on those questions, just so I get an idea of what is intended, I guess, by that green space, is that similar to, how I read this is, it's sort of similar to PD that's in Fitchburg, where you just see the back of homes, like, so there aren't any homes that are facing the road, and you know, this is, I guess, the portion that you, as you get closer, I guess, between Seminole Highway and Fish Hatchery. It's just fences with backyards as opposed to frontages, I guess. Is that what's intended or something different?
In a general sense, yes. The 100 feet, I think, is a more generous setback than what you think. Than I think I'm picturing the same area of PD that you are in Fitchburg. I couldn't tell you what the exact dimension is there. I don't think it's a whole. I don't think there's much setback. I think those fences are near the right-of-way edge, and we're talking about trying to, you know, potentially, you know, by deed restriction or other means, provide for a deeper setback here than that. But in general, yes, backyards to the highway and not front yards.
Mr. Sarah, please.
And I think the intention too here, as we've kind of looked at this, is, you know, knowing kind of typically what Epic does along their edges as well. They do a very significant large amount of landscaping here, and typically, obviously, when we talked about the north neighborhood and the buffer requirement in that plan, that was a different location, different situation. I think as we looked at this and, you know, and looking at what Epic has done elsewhere and what we anticipate they would do in this location, there's probably going to be a very heavy amount of landscaping on that south side of the road. I think our thought was, if it's going to be more of an entrance for Epic especially, the north side should have some of that character as well, of kind of trying to match some of the heavy landscaping, not having just the one side that's full of trees and the north side that doesn't have any trees to it. I think we also wanted to kind of look, as we transition out of the city, trying to transition to the township, trying to create a more natural type feel, not just a stark transition and a line saying this is where the city starts and this is where the city ends. And we wanted to kind of try to smooth that transition slightly with what we think Epic will do, and also with this area as well. So that's the intent of the goal of it, to try to match what's on the south, what we think will be on the south side, but also match moving into the township as well.
Mr. Horsfall, please.
So just correct me if I'm right or wrong. So the whole property that we're looking at is 700 acres?
Roughly, the planning area for this neighborhood,
And
yes.
commercial mixed use was 70 acres? So that's
Approximately.
kind of a rule of thumb, is 10% of a site you'll take as, is
That wasn't really, we didn't take that rigorous an approach, I would
Oh,
admit, but I
okay.
think that's you know, it's a fairly reasonable balance.
And that's based on experience and all planning and
Yep.
stuff like
Yep.
that. That's kind of, you look in the textpot, it says 10% of it should be commercials, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Relatively.
that's in the ballpark of the balance
Okay, thank you.
by land area, yeah.
Any other comments or feedback? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, I have another one. For the commercial area, we had before us 2 or 3 months ago, I think, you know, a proposed development of that property, or a portion of that at least. Is this neighborhood plan, would it accommodate that sort? I mean, not that we would approve it, but would it accommodate that sort of development if if everybody liked it?
Mr. Sarah, please.
Yes, I think it would. I don't see why it wouldn't. I think potentially, as Jason kind of laid out, you've got your kind of standard height requirements, and there is the ability to go above and beyond that if there was a bonus. In essence, a bonus would be granted as part of that. But yes, it would accommodate that development.
Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. In terms of the design guidelines, I'm not in love with the pictures that are in the submittal, and I have to say that I think the idea of going with 7-story buildings in this area of well, I guess it's not even the city right now, but perhaps one day. And even the 5-story building, just, I'm not sure it's the right character for development there. And I guess I don't understand the reasoning behind doing 5- and 7-story buildings in the red area to the east of the floodplain, and then we've got to do this green strip buffer area to preserve the bucolic, rural feel of the area. I mean, it's just kind of, I don't get it. And I think if we view this as a development where we want to have some kind of rural or rural character to it, or less dense, the idea that we're going to do 7-story and 5-story buildings in the orange and red area, I don't think we're going to achieve that.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other feedback? I think specifically on that last item that Mr. Manley mentioned is, and tonight we're talking about a neighborhood plan, not specific to that project. And I hope that we see something move forward with that project. Certainly the final details haven't all been worked out yet, and we know that there's work to do. But when you look at some of the things that we've seen as far as the quality of the construction that they're talking about and just the topography of the land, I think we could do some really great things out there. So I'm very interested to see what moves forward in that area, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Other comments? Any additional feedback? If not, we are going to move on to the next item. Jason, unless you had anything else?
No, appreciate your feedback. I guess I would just ask if there's anything else that you feel I should know, that Adam and I should know as we are drafting out the rest of the details to this plan. Any thoughts in your minds about this planning area?
Right. Mr. Heinzen.
I'm sorry, I have one more
That's all right.
question. The property that is deed restricted right now, if, I don't know how difficult it would be to get Madison to release it or not, but would it be, could it be, I don't know, developed is the wrong word, but turned into public space, or does it have to remain in its sort of current agricultural look?
Yeah, I think that a public open space, even a recreational space, is a plausible use within the limits of that deed restriction.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
With that, we are going to move on to agenda item number 8, which is a public hearing. And this would be a recommendation to the Common Council if we were to take action on 8A. This is a zoning ordinance text amendment to modify section 13-2-5, parent C of the city's floodplain zoning ordinance relating to flood insurance study maps, and create sections 13-2-5, parent C, parent 1, and 13-2-5C1A relating to official maps based on other studies. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Sayre, please.
So I know Mr. Horsfall kind of smiled at me. So this is actually the same ordinance that we did last month. To be honest with you, we had a numbering error in it. I just wanted to bring it back just to kind of cover all our bases, to make sure that we're adopting this in the correct way and there couldn't ever be a issue thrown at us in the future. So this is a public hearing before the Plan Commission to amend the floodplain ordinance as referenced by the mayor. Public hearing is held before the Plan Commission, and this is then a recommendation to the Common Council.
We are now in the public hearing stage. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Is there anyone? Michael? On this issue, sorry. All right. We can talk later, okay? Anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Agenda item 8A is before us. Mr. Sayre?
So once again, this is the same item we talked about last month. Nothing has changed except the lettering in the ordinance. This would adopt a flood study that was done out in the dry tributary in the Epic area. And this would just adopt the study that was approved by AECOM, or done by AECOM and approved by FEMA and the DNR. It would be adopted as part of our ordinances and would be incorporated as part of a flood study in our ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Mr. Heinzen, Mr. I did it 3 times now tonight. Mr. Horsfall, please.
I'm not going to answer until you know. This time, I'd like to recommend that the Common Council approve and adopt the text amendment as detailed in the report.
We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Thank you for that. And Mr. Horsfall is the most senior member of this commission, so I certainly should remember his name.
It doesn't mean anything.
We are now on agenda item 9, which we are not looking at any action this evening either. This is discussion regarding the 2016 housing data. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. So in your packets, I did include the 2016 housing data, including kind of the chart that's before you and also the graphs as well, just outlining the number of single-family duplex and multifamily permits that have been issued over the years. So for 2016, we did issue 64 single-family permits for new single-family houses. We issued 6 permits for duplexes, 3 permits for duplexes that added 6 units. And then we issued 1 permit for a 45-unit apartment building. That's the apartment building in Scenic Ridge. So I know the mayor and I have talked about this before. I know the mayor actually asked me to kind of do an update on the kind of the housing numbers that we have in the city. And as part of this, I wanted to kind of share this data, but then also just briefly review kind of what we have coming forward soon, and then also kind of what we potentially have in the queue as well as for projects. So one project that we have currently under construction is the Hometown Grove subdivision. That's located south of Glacier Edge Elementary School. It's an entirely single-family subdivision that will contain 32 single-family lots. They are in the process of putting roads into that project right now. Most likely, building permits for houses could be pulled probably within about 3 months from now. So looking at July, August, potentially people pulling permits for single-family houses in that location. Kettle Creek North, we did approve the developer's agreement for phase 1 of that project. They're currently looking at 23 single-family lots in phase 1. That will potentially start here sometime in 17. They're still currently working through some stormwater items out there, but that project is planned to start here in 17. Phase 7 of Cathedral Point was approved. Or the developer's agreement of that has 46 single-family lots. That's going to be starting pretty soon here, and most likely permits will be pulled in that area most likely by August of this year. Cross Point Estates, that's that single family project that's located on Nine Mound. It's kind of left over from the land that Epic bought from Jim Weber. That will be coming back most likely to the June Plan Commission meeting, and that has 11 single family lots. 410 East Ronan Avenue, that's just west of the Sherman-Williams. That's the mixed-use project there. That has 2 apartment units. 142 Paoli Street, that's the mixed-use project at Paoli and South Nine Mound. That has 29 apartment units. What I'm being told by the developer is that will start at some point in August of this year. The West End, that's the Steve Brown Apartments project. That was approved last year by the city. They have pulled all 37 permits for the multifamily. They also pulled all the permits as well for the commercial as well. So that's reflective in the chart that's before you right now. So those projects are most likely starting, or have started, or will be starting here in the near future. Other potential projects that we've looked at include Kettle Creek North. That is 151 lots that are remaining that are that's not including that phase 1. So that will be coming forward in phases over time. Cathedral Point has 29 single-family lots that remain. That will be an additional phase at some point in the future. Murray Glen Apartments, that's the land north of Pasquale's by the Knoll Manor Senior Housing Project. They have 32 additional apartments that were approved as part of that plan development. That will be coming forward at some point. Legends Edge development, that was discussed by the Plan Commission in November. That has a variety of steps and processes to kind of get through, but that has 750 apartment units. Downtown redevelopment of World of Variety and Ace Hardware, that has a planned 55 apartment units. Sugar Creek Commons, that's the project on West Ronan Avenue. They're looking at 255 apartment units. 102, 104 Lincoln Street, which was discussed tonight, obviously currently has 113 units. 841 North Main, which we talked about tonight, once again has 120 to 140 senior units potentially. And then finally, we have the North Neighborhood area, which we still don't have any plats in that area, but additional development of single-family and multifamily will be occurring in that area. So those are the kind of the projects that we have coming forward right now, and also potential projects that we have in the queue. On the screen before you, once again, is the same information as before, except in graph form. This data also goes back to 1980, just looking at the number of single-family permits issued, and then also the number of multifamily units for permits that we've issued each year as well. Just a comparison over time. So, wanted to share this information with the Plan Commission, and I guess I'll be happy to answer any questions if I can about anything that's happening, or hear your thoughts or anything else as well.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Sarah. And just the other day when I saw these numbers, I just added up and I just picked from 2010 to 2016. It's just, I'm not exactly sure why, but I did. And I totaled it up. So in those 6 years, we had 454 single-family homes and 976 multifamily. So more than 2 to 1. And also in that time span, in 2010 and also 2013, there were no apartments those 2 years, but it's still over a 2 to 1 ratio. But with that, we'll open it up to questions and comments. Mr. Horsfeld, please.
Adam, did you ever figure out for the whole city of Verona, if you take all the acreage divided by what the development or the number of dwellings, what's our development per acre? As just a gross number, is it 5? Is it 50?
Mr. Sarah?
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't done that. So we could do, I think the debate is, do you just take it as a whole? So take the overall acreage and this the number of units we have, or do you start subtracting out parks and
No, just
the stuff behind City Hall? That's mostly floodplain and wetland.
no,
and
I'm just thinking more like a gross number, just to kind of get a feel for, I mean, what is our dwellings per unit, per acre, and just rough. I mean, I don't know. You know, you look at the line, you can kind of draw, and this doesn't include any of the stuff that's already existing. But, you know, in 1980, what was population in 1980? 1,000? 5,000? Maybe.
I don't know, but I can talk to the assessor and get the number of units that we have in the city, and then we can easily back the area out. That's not a problem to do.
And it'd be cool to kind of see it as over time, which way we're progressing. I mean, Mayor's correct. I mean, you look at 2011 and forward, you would think that that average line would be increasing based on the number of units for the apartments. But it's just curiosity.
Mr. Manley?
I think that I think I understand the kind of the data point that Mr. Horsfall is looking for. I think what would skew that considerably is that Epic owns a fair amount of land that is in the city that's many acres, that is, you know, obviously perhaps someday they'll develop that, but it's going to just, if you're dividing the entire acreage of the city by dwelling units, that's going to, the acquisition of all that land is going to drive the density number downward quite a bit.
But that wasn't, in 1980, that wasn't developed either, and it was still part of the city.
No.
So it's not gonna.
Wasn't part of the city.
Right, or whatever it is, it's still gonna be not included in this number. I'm just trying to get a data point, and you're right, Epic's not gonna probably go residential, but it's potentially can skew the number one way or the other. And I don't know what the right number is, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on the housing data? Go ahead, Mr. Horsfall.
I started in 2000.
You started on the Plan Commission in 2000?
Yeah. I had nothing to do with those two big spikes.
I think when you were talking about the population before, I haven't verified this, but I believe in 1990 when we had the census, we were about 5,300 in population. So we're just about double that now, if that's a correct number. Mr. Turk,
According to Wikipedia, it's 3,300, 1980.
3,300?
So 1980 was 3,300
1990, you're right.
5,300, 1990.
Yeah.
and 5,300 in 1990.
Mhm.
And what are we now?
Just over 12,000, roughly.
Hmm.
So Jason Valerius from the audience is advising that it's about 1.1 units per acre.
Okay.
Is that based on, why don't you come to the microphone, Jason? Is that based on square area, or is that based
Yeah,
on
just
population?
based on rough numbers, there's about 6.2 square miles in the city, which is about 30, almost 4,000 acres. And there's, I think, around 4,500 housing units total in the city, so a few more housing units than acres, 1.1, whole city.
Wait, so
Go ahead,
That-
Mr. Horsfall.
that's housing, or, I mean, does
That's
that
tot-
include the apartments then too?
All units and all acreage
Hmm,
of all
okay.
types, city boundaries.
Interesting. Thanks.
Any other feedback or questions on the housing data? Not seeing any. Adam, thank you for putting that together. We are now on agenda item number 10, which is reports and comments from the planning department. Mr. Sarah, please.
Thank you. The only thing to report tonight is Catherine Holt is here in the audience. She's the new community development specialist, so she'll be attending these meetings and also helping out and also presenting in the future as well. So we're excited to have her here. She's got some great experience from the East Coast, and we're very excited to have her to help out and hopefully move along some projects that have been, especially long-term planning projects that haven't gone forward. So happy to have her here, and we're looking forward to working with her.
Her 6th day on the job, and this is the 2nd evening meeting I've been with her so far. Thank you for being here, and thank you for coming to the city of Verona.
Did you warn her about that?
About plan commission or about who? The
Either.
night meetings.
We are now on agenda item number 11, reports and comments from planning commissioners. Anything anyone wants to add?
Is the July meeting gonna be the 6th
The July meeting?
or the 5th? What did you say?
So the June meeting will be the 5th. The July meeting, what did we decide on? Is the 6th. The July meeting's that first Thursday, the 6th.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to add is last week, Wednesday, we had another regular meeting with the Joint Planning Committee between the city and the town of Verona. I saw earlier in the evening in the crowd, Town Board Chair Mark Geller was here, and Town Board member and Planning Commission Chair from the town, Doug Maxwell, was here as well. Those meetings are going very well, and we will continue to meet on a regular and as-needed basis. Mr. Horsfall.
Any issues come up that, with those meetings, or that you can talk about, or?
Mr. Sarah?
No, we've discussed, I think, 3 CSMs that have been on the agenda. So these smaller land divisions, these have been areas that, to be honest, it may be within the B kind of planning area, but the city has no ability to grow into that area because of service issues. So no, there haven't been any issues on there. Mr. Heinzen's also on that committee as well too. So, but no, there haven't been any issues. I think, as we've looked at it from a city staff standpoint, the town does a lot of shared driveways, which typically the city doesn't, we don't do a lot of those, or even private roads as well. So I think there's just kind of the differences of kind of how the town operates versus the city operates. But no, there haven't been any issues, and it's been a pretty good process so far. Great.
Anything else to add? If not, the final item on the agenda is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn? We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Turk. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you.